Initiative. That's GLLI, Translated YA Book Prize Committee. David Jacobson, chair of the 2021 committee, and I are presenting the session. I'm in Los Angeles. David is in Seattle. And we're really pleased to be with you here today to introduce you to an important new book prize. So feel free to type question or comment in the chat at any time. Heidi will note your questions for us and we'll address them at the end. I am sharing the PowerPoint and I can't actually see the chat while I'm doing that. So that's why we want to reserve the questions.
So Annette, I just want to take a moment to let people know if you're interested and if your Zoom is very up to date, there is a live transcript, subtitles being provided automatically. So if your Zoom shows CC live transcript in the controls at the bottom, you can toggle it off and on by hitting the little up arrow next to the CC. So if that's helpful to you, go ahead and do it. Just wanted to make you aware of that. Sorry for the interruption.
This is also a little bit of housekeeping. The books that we're going to talk about are all listed on a handout, and Heidi is going to put the link in the chat for that. And if there's anything that you want to revisit on the slides later, the slides will be available afterwards as well. So I'm just going to tell you a little bit about how I come to this. As some of you may know, I've had a long-standing professional interest in international youth literature, especially children's book translations. When I worked for the Association of Canadian Publishers in the mid-1980s, I helped staff the Canadian Collective booth at the Bologna Children's Book Fair. And that's where I found out about the International Youth Library Study Fellowship Program. I applied and eventually got in, and that's something I have in common with David, who was there more recently. The International Youth Library, the IYL, is housed in a 15th century castle on the outskirts of Munich. It is an amazing place. The project I worked on focused on the lopsided cultural exchange between English language and French language children's book translations in Canada. Far more gets translated from English into French than from French into English. This was the germ of the idea for my dissertation, which explored decision-making by US children's book publishers in selecting books from other countries to translate into English for the US market. And I've also done some research on translations of award-winning books with Jewish content. Some of you may remember, I presented on this at AGL in Pasadena in 2012 and updated that work in 2019 at the Woodland Hills Conference. My next update in a few years will include most of the books you hear about today. So David, you come to this through your expertise in Japanese language and literature. So tell us about that and also the Jewish connection.
Thanks, Annette, and hi, everybody. As Annette notes, I started out as a Japan specialist, initially as a translator and journalist for the AP, CNN, and NHK, which is Japanese Public Broadcasting. But in 2008, I moved over to book publishing, and not too long after that, published my first title, called Are You an Echo? The Lost Poetry of Misuzu Kaneko. It's a children's picture book, which includes the life story and poetry of a beloved Japanese children's poet, whose work has mostly not been translated into English. Thereafter, I plunged headlong into the world of children's literature and literature in translation through affiliations with the US Board on Books for Young People, the Global Literature and Libraries Initiative, GLLI, and of course, GLLI's Translated YA Book Prize, which I chaired this past year. I'm currently working on 4 book projects, 2 of which focus on Jewish women who helped change the world post-World War II, Yella Lepman and Beata Sirota Gordon. Yella Lepman, by the way, is the German Jew who founded the International Youth Library, where Annette and I both studied in in an effort to encourage empathy and cross-cultural understanding among children. We are calling this talk the Global Literature and Libraries Initiative Translated YA Book Prize, and why it matters to Judaica librarians. Truly, we think the prize matters to everyone.
Yes. And so today we'll talk to you about GLLI, the Translated YA Book Prize, and share the books of Jewish interest that have been shortlisted so far. And that is in the first 3 years of the award. So GLLI is a nonprofit established 5 years ago by translator and publisher Rachel Hildebrandt Reynolds to raise the profile of world literature in the English-speaking world. Our current director, pictured here on the slide, is Karen Vendry, a school librarian and consultant who's based in Istanbul. GLLI is a network of translators, librarians, teachers, editors, really anybody who's interested in world literature for personal and/or professional reasons. Though here we will focus on our prize for teen readers, GLLI also has a number of projects centered on adult and children's books. For example, we've been building a database of translations and produce pan-publisher catalogs so librarians interested in translations can find them grouped together. We've done quite a few presentations at ALA over the last few years, working with different divisions, offices, and roundtables to share programming ideas and provide opportunities to network. And of course, we've created the Translated YA Book Prize. But first, let's just take a step back and talk about translations in order to provide a little context for the prize. Why publish, promote, and read translations when we have so many books of our own? Translations are often window books, the ones that provide insight into other people's lives, but they can be mirror books too, the ones that reflect our own experiences back to us. Rudine Sims Bishop's well-known metaphor of mirrors and windows also includes sliding glass doors that invite the reader to imaginatively step through into other worlds. Reading widely can help break down stereotypes and encourage empathy. Looking for diversity in subject matter, tone, style, translations are sure to offer it. And we are hardly the only country with great books. Translations can broaden our understanding of literary style and content. Reading books in which our teens are not front and center offers a good corrective and supplement to what they see in the books that are written expressly for them. There are a number of issues to keep in mind when we talk about translations. The world may be increasingly interconnected. I mean, think about how we're all zooming all over the world right now. But the English-speaking world is still fairly insular when it comes to embracing books from other countries. We publish far too few translations. For many years, it was widely agreed that about 3% of US publications were translations. Hence, Chad Post's blog at the University of Rochester called 3%. Today, roughly only 4% of books for young readers are translations, still a very small number. Now, there's no shortage of US books being translated and made available to other countries, but we should be on the receiving end too. Literary exchange should flow both ways. By not publishing enough translations in the US, what we are really saying is that our books are more important than books from elsewhere. Most of the translations we have tend to be from Western European languages. And certainly these are important books, but it would benefit us greatly to be able to sample what more of the rest of the world is producing too. And though we love picture book translations for younger children, they tend to dominate the market. They are less expensive to publish and easier to sell. We also need more texts that reflect what older children in other countries are reading. Translations and even English language imports are subject to Americanization during the editing process. This is because US publishers have to ensure that their books will appeal to their target audience. However, you can do that without erasing the cultural content that makes the book so compelling in the first place. The trick is to have some trust that the child reader will be open to new and different ideas about the world. After all, children are learning all the time. Librarians should be using some of their budgets, however tiny, for translations, because if sales are too low, the books will go out of print. You know, publishing is a business. This is true even of award winners like the Batchelder winners and honor books. And if anyone isn't familiar with the Batchelder, the Mildred Batchelder Award is an ALA award given to the publisher of the year's best translated children's book. In my dissertation, I surveyed editors about the supply and demand question for translations. Should they create the demand by publishing and promoting the books, or should they respond to a demand from customers? And the response was split. Some felt that it was their job to acquire wonderful books, including translations, and get them out into the world. Others were willing to take on the extra financial burden of publishing translations only if they had an identified market. As with diverse books in general, you should let publishers know when you really like what they're doing, and also let them know when you think they could be doing better. Use the power of the purse. If you value translations and want to see more published, you should buy them. And I hope you'll find things here that you want to buy. There are notable gaps in what is being translated. The International Board on Books for Young People's Hans Christian Andersen Award for Writing and Illustration is often called the Little Nobel and is considered the most prestigious international award for children's literature. If the winner of the writing prize is from a non-English speaking country, and that is usually the case, very often there are few or no books available in English. At least getting that award can spur translation. With a few exceptions, African and Asian countries are not well represented in terms of translations. We're starting to see more translations from these countries, and especially China.
The Translated YA Book Prize addresses many of these issues that Annette has just mentioned. Nowhere is the paucity of material more evident than among books for teens. For a host of reasons, publishers publish far more picture books and adult books in translation than they do books for 12 to 18-year-olds. We wanted to bring more books to youth during their impressionable teen years, when they are first starting to develop awareness as global citizens. We also wanted to encourage publishers to translate and publish more international fiction and nonfiction for teens. The award goes to the author, translator, and publisher of the book. I think we are unique in recognizing all three. And the fact that we do not require the translation to have been first published in the US is also unusual and helps identify worthy books published all around the world. Since publishing in this area is still fairly limited, the prize looks at the previous 3 years' worth of books. This provides a wide enough field from which to choose our annual shortlist of roughly a dozen books or so. In this third year of the prize, we've seen submissions jump 35%. The titles represent 21 countries and 16 languages, including seldom translated languages such as Welsh and Basque. What is particularly striking this year is the number of translations from our neighbors in Latin America, which have typically been hard to come by. So far, every year there have been Jewish books that made the shortlist, as well as books that did not. Though it's not a Jewish prize per se, we think it will always be worth checking to see if any books of Jewish interest make the cut. Now, on to the 6 books that we want to share with you today. All the books with significant Jewish content shortlisted by the YA Translated Book Prize to date. They come from a range of countries. We will also mention 2 Palestinian books with minimal to no Jewish content, but that we think are noteworthy due to the context they provide. All of these titles have literary value and teen appeal. Some will be controversial and are certainly not for all collections. Some books are geared to readers at the younger end of the 12 to 18 age range, and others are really crossover adult titles. Jews in this country are fortunate to have a vigorous publishing industry that produces a spectrum of books with Jewish content, booksellers who carry them, and librarians like you who stock and promote them. But the richness of titles we get from American and Israeli publishing houses can sometimes blind us, we think, to the fact that other countries publish books of considerable Jewish interest too. Our goal today, therefore, is to share some of those titles that we've seen through the lens of the Translated YA Book Prize. One trend we have noticed is older classic books being translated into English for the first time. This may be because publishers take so few risks on translated literature that the ones they do publish have to be hits in their home countries. 2 of our books fall into this category. Abigail, a novel by one of Hungary's most successful writers, Magda Szabó, was written in 1970, and Jan Terlouw's Winter in Wartime, a 1973 classic from the Netherlands. In Abigail, a spoiled and entitled teen, Gina Vitae, is suddenly deposited by her father in a very strict Catholic girls' boarding school. It is World War II, and Gina's father, a general in the Hungarian army, which was a German ally, by the way, can't keep her at home for various reasons he doesn't disclose. Of course, she breaks every rule in sight and is miserable. There is a belief on campus that a statue called Abigail can dispense advice. Though she initially scoffs at the idea, Gina tries it out. Abigail is the story of a teen who suddenly learns how the tumultuous events shaking the larger world around her can have devastating consequences, especially for her Jewish classmates. Len Ricks, the translator, has been lauded for a superb translation. Note that of the 3 books pictured here, only Abigail has the translator's name on the cover. That's typical. Sometimes you won't even see the translator's name on the title page. Only a few other books in our presentation recognize the translator on the cover. Watch for them in the next few slides. Winter in Wartime, set in the Netherlands toward the end of World War II, is very cinematic. We thought, in fact, it would make a great movie. And in fact, it has. It was made into a film, the Netherlands' official entry for the 2010 Academy Awards in the foreign film category. The book's clever opening scene takes place during a tense confrontation on a country road during a blackout. A 16-year-old named Michiel is drawn into the resistance. His family welcomes travelers in need of some food and brief shelter, including a Jewish father and son en route to what they hope will be safety. That's it for the overt Jewish content. But of course, the wartime context has resonance for Jewish readers. Though fiction, this book is based on the author's childhood experiences. The translator, Laura Watkinson, is well known for her translations from Dutch into English. This one absolutely captures the personalities and ambience of a small village where individual decisions have outsized consequences. Not surprisingly, our titles also include historical fiction, such as the classics I just mentioned, but also newer releases, such as Almost Autumn from Norway. Almost Autumn is a bittersweet romance that offers another window on Holocaust experience. 15-year-old Ilse Stern has had a crush on Herman Rode, the boy next door, for years. He finally asked her to see a movie with him only to stand her up. She is, of course, devastated. But Hermann can't tell Ilse, who is Jewish, that he was suddenly called away because he is working for the resistance. As the story plays out with a roundup of Jewish family in Oslo, we see the role played by serendipity and how ordinary people are caught between helping their Jewish neighbors and collaborating with the Nazis. Award-winning translator Rosie Hedger brings life to every sensuous detail of Ilse's Oslo, perhaps because she spent a year at the University of Oslo.
We also had books of historical fantasy. The Book of Pearl and Max, both from France, fit this category. Timothée de Fontbelle's The Book of Pearl is a carefully layered fantasy encompassing several different times and places, one of them France in World War II. A young Jew, Joshua Pearl, enlists in the French army and is tragically killed. But wait, Joshua Pearl turns up again when a desperate prince from a fairy kingdom appears and takes on his identity. The two worlds, real and fairy, occasionally intersect. There is also a sort of detective frame story in which the narrator, a writer obsessed with what he has been able to learn about the mysterious Joshua Pearl, tries to track him down. It's really not an easy book to describe. And to some extent, we also follow the fortunes of Joshua's parents and other Jews in the neighborhood. Aficionados of fantasy will appreciate the really evocative world building and epic love story that is at the heart of the book. The translators, Sarah Artizone and Sam Gordon, have managed to convey the romance, mystery, and wistful longing of de Fontbelle's style. If the Book of Pearl is swathed in mist, Sarah Cohen-Scalise Max is painted in lurid, regimented colors. This book is audacious and pretty terrifying, definitely at the upper end of YA readership, well into adult. Our narrator starts telling his story from the womb, as you can see on the cover. Max is born as part of the Nazi Lebensborn program, a real eugenics program that was an attempt to breed perfect little Nazis from Aryan stock. The text is replete with cursing, and there is actually quite a lot of sex. But nothing is gratuitous. It's all intended to show the horror and perversion of a Nazi education. What happens when Max ends up in a school paired with the one person who might be even more ruthless than he is? Lucas, a Jew who can pass as Aryan, is bent on revenge for the murder of his family. Max should scorn Lucas, a Jew, but he senses a bond, and an unlikely, very unlikely, friendship begins between the two boys. The story unrolls with the inevitability of a Greek tragedy. Penny Houston's vigorous translation does the book full justice. As a lover of nonfiction, I was personally thrilled to have a nonfiction title on our inaugural shortlist. Defying the Nazis, a young reader's version of an adult book, is not at first glance what you might expect us to identify as Jewish content. It's a biography of a Nazi officer, Wilhelm Hossenfeld. But this was a man who was a teacher at heart and whose valued contributions to the German military were not about killing Jews, but about organizational acumen and providing sports and educational programs for the soldiers. More important, though, of course, he actively saved at least 60 Poles and Jews from certain death, including Jewish pianist Władysław Szpilman. And that's a story that you may know from seeing the film The Pianist. How Hossenfeld was eventually recognized by Yad Vashem as righteous among the nations is in itself quite a story. Finally, we wanted to introduce you to two shortlisted titles from Palestinian authors. Trees for the Absentees by Ahlam Bisharat is a very poetic, female-centered story.
Palestinian university student Philistia works part-time in a hammam, a woman's public bath, a type of work that she learned from her grandmother. Philistia's father is in an Israeli jail. The book treats life under the occupation frankly, but without polemics. Trees for the Absentees offers a sliding glass door into a world that will be new to many readers in its particulars, but is familiar in its focus on a young woman's relationships and musings. More introspective, this book will likely appeal to older teens and those who love dreams and magical realism. Wondrous Journeys in Strange Lands by Sonja Nimmer is another Palestinian book that we recommend for those who would like to know more about Palestinian culture. A great read. It has both fairy tale-like and real qualities and involves loves, losses, tragedy, and bliss. On top of that, it's narrated by a stereotype-busting Arab woman who, defying all odds, travels from Palestine to Egypt to Morocco to India, who is an avid reader who educates herself to great advantage later in life, and on 2 occasions even dresses as a man once in order to work on a pirate ship. This is an unusual title specifically because of the lack of any identifiable Palestinianness about it. Because, as one critic writes, the author reminds us that other Palestinian pasts exist. Palestinian readers can step out of their Palestinian realities and into the past, broadening their notion of what Palestine is and can be. Apart from our own shortlists, there are translated YA books from the last few years that we'd also like to recommend. And here are 2 examples. You doubtless know The Librarian of Auschwitz, the Spanish novel based on the experiences of real-life Auschwitz survivor Dita Kraus. After all, it was the 2018 Sidney Taylor Award teen winner. But you may not recognize this cover for the 2019 special edition paperback, or know that it comes with discussion questions and a Q&A with Dita Kraus. Similarly, Catherine's War, a French graphic novel based on the author's mother's girlhood fleeing the Nazis in occupied France, has got a lot of critical attention, including a Batchelder honor. It's aimed at middle grade and younger YA readers. Though the story is fictionalized, the book has good nonfiction back matter about the war, and also the author's mother's career as a famous photographer. France has a long history of producing graphic novels and comics, and we can expect to see more, hopefully some with Jewish content. We mentioned at the outset that we created the Translated YA Book Prize to fill a gap. And here is a new award from the UK to fill another gap, an award for authors and illustrators of Jewish books for young children. But in this case, authors and illustrators must be resident in Europe, the UK, or Israel. Winners will be considered for publication by newly founded Green Bean Press, which specializes in translations of Jewish children's books. This is a very encouraging addition to the growing interest in translation and complements the Sidney Taylor Book Award. And the fact that the award is excluding US authors and illustrators speaks both to the strength of the Jewish publishing world in the States, and that Green Bean believes there is a significant presence of Jewish books in Europe and Israel that deserve publication in English.
Of course, we are not alone in caring about translated children's books from other countries. And children's, teen, and adult books, I should say. This page lists a number of organizations that we also recommend following, depending on your interests. IBI, the International Board on Books for Young People, and USBBY, the US section of IBI. are likely familiar to the children's librarians here. We've mentioned the wonderful International Youth Library, where both David and I had the opportunity to work on our research. Outside In World is a UK organization that has been promoting translations for quite a long time. Publishing Perspectives is a free e-newsletter of international book trade news, and they do quite a lot keeping up with translations. World Kidlit is very active with translator panels and other programs. Their signature program is called World Kidlit Month in September. And Worlds of Words, housed at the University of Arizona College of Education, is another really excellent resource. We've listed our references plus a few other readings that you might find of interest on these two slides. So finally, for more information about GLLI, you can find us at our webpage or via our Facebook and Twitter accounts. Detailed information about the Translated YA Book Prize is there as well. Karen Van Drie, our director, does a great job of running the blog, which features a different country or theme every month. And this month, appropriately enough, is International YA Lit Month. As mentioned earlier, one of our projects is a small but growing translation database. So there's really a lot going on. We hope you will look up some of the other shortlist titles too. You'll find each annual list annotated under the prizes link. There is something there for every taste with lots of new voices to discover. And some of them speak to the diversity of Jewish experience from all around the world. Thank you for your attention, and we are happy to answer your questions.
Thank you very much. That was so interesting. Annette, can you, yes, that's what I was going to ask you to stop sharing the screen. I saw Ellen has her hand up, but first I wanted to get in a question before I forget. I was wondering, so all of these are books that need to be translated into English to be eligible for this prize, right? Into English.
Yes.
So is there any parallel in other countries of a prize for books translated into their local language?
Well, I know the UK obviously had a prize of translation into English, and that prize was terminated about 2 years ago. So in some senses, the GLLI prize fills in for the lack of such a prize in the UK. But of course, that's only English literature.
Right. Yeah, I was wondering because you talked about with the mirrors and windows, how it sort of centers us, and this in a way still centers us because it's saying that, you know, we're giving a prize to things that are making it accessible to us. And so I just wondered if there are other people out there doing it, you know, in a different language.
All my work has been looking at translations into English, so I can't answer that, you know, like offhand.
Okay, yeah, I was just curious.
I would say that many other countries have a much larger percentage of the books that are published locally, some 20 to 40% in translation from other languages. France has a very big translation business, Italy, Germany, Japan, China.
Denmark.
So they do not probably need a prize per se, because there is so much translation going on.
Okay,
So
thank you.
the English speaking country, well, the UK and the US especially are notable for the low number of percentage of translations.
And that's why you need a prize to encourage it. Okay.
Exactly.
Ellen, what was your question?
I had a comment before a question, which is, we always think people are oriented the way we are. And it's always startling, like say, take a trip to Europe and pick up their newspaper and their main focus is nowhere nearly either the story covered or the point of view. So that for kids reading literature, it's very mind expanding to understand where the other person is coming from. And the second thing is, Lisa, I may need your help on the name. I missed the very beginning. I had a phone call. But did I hear you say something about a book from Japan about a lady named Gordon?
Oh, David is writing a biography. Actually, David, I'll go ahead and pass it on to you.
Yes, I'm writing a biography of a woman named Gordon, Beata Sirota Gordon.
Okay, do you know that there is one that just came out and it was a runner-up for the National Jewish Book Award?
Yes, I did the fact checking for that book.
I mean, I was going to say nobody ever heard of her, and here's this Austrian girl who turns into a Japanese girl thanks to the Holocaust, and she makes the Japanese Constitution more helpful to women than the American Constitution. Talk about point of view. I mean, her life story is incredible. I never heard, I mean, you learn, you know, they say you learn things from children. You learn more things from children's picture books than any other place in the world.
And another aspect to that story, which is a little bit peripheral to Beata Sirota Gordon, is that her father was a concert pianist.
Right.
And the reason that they got into Japan is that Japan was looking in the 1920s and the 1930s to train Western musicians. And it turns out there was, I don't know the numbers, 50, 100 top-notch classical musicians who sat out the war in Japan. And the Japanese, though they were allies of the Nazis, resisted calls to turn these people over. So they were playing, conducting, and composing up until 1943 to Japanese audiences during the middle of the war.
Amazing. And of course, if Japanese controlled China, and look at, I mean, through victory and what have you, look at all the Jews who sat out the war in Shanghai when the Japanese didn't listen to the Germans.
Exactly.
So Sarah also has her hand up. Go ahead and unmute Sarah.
A couple of questions. One is, again, I apologize, I didn't get to this session at the very beginning. Will you be sharing the presentation with us? Those slides? Okay.
Yes.
My question is, I noticed, apart from the two Palestinian novels, that the others are mostly set during the Second World War and the Holocaust. So I was just wondering, did you come across other books that were set in other time periods or had different settings? I just, you know, in terms of Jewish experience and culture, I was just wondering whether you came across other content, other settings, plots.
David, did you this year?
This year there was one title, which was a graphic novel from France, which came out, which was about the predicament of being Jewish in France, contemporary. And it was purely the protagonist's own sort of identity. And in the background, I mean, it's you don't get a flavor for it in the book, but of course, you know all of these things that have happened in France over the last, what would you say, 10, 20 years. So that's one that comes to mind. I would say one of the areas that we need to work on in terms of the GLLI award is certainly cluing in books from Israel and publishers who publish books from Hebrew translation, which we haven't done yet. And a lot of the books that we get are just a result of whatever outreach efforts that we make, partly because it's the very early days of this prize. and it's not widely known yet.
I was curious. Thank you so much for that, David. A sort of a pet project of mine was to find out if there were graphic novels coming out of Israel that had been translated that would be appropriate for high schoolers. And I wondered whether because as a genre, it's, rather than just translations in Hebrew of very popular graphic novels published in Israel, in America and other countries, but actually native Israeli graphic novels. So I suppose whether you come across any, and if you could keep on the lookout. It's really a dual purpose.
Well, Rutu Modan has had several, but not recently. I think her oldest is from a couple of years ago. So they were not eligible to be considered for this prize. There's another one that I would recommend, but from years ago. There's a classic Japanese, I'm sorry, I'm going back to my Japanese roots, at least academic roots, manga artist whose name was Osamu Tezuka Osamu, who is considered the godfather of Japanese comics. And he wrote a book called, Adoro Funitsugu is the Japanese title. It's something like Message to Adolf. And it's about, from a Japanese perspective, 3 Adolfs in the book: a German-born Adolf, a Jewish boy whose name is Adolf, and of course, Adolf Hitler. And it's in translation, in English, a 2-volume series about these 2 German and Jewish Adolfs who live in Japan, their connection to the growing war sentiment in Japan and in Germany. It's fascinating, particularly because it comes from a Japanese author. It's still a World War II book, but I think it's quite unique.
And what's the title of that, David?
I believe it is Message to Adolf, or Message from Adolf. And the author is, Osamu is the first name, Osamu, and the last name is Tezuka, Tezuka.
Thank you so much.
David, I typed it into the chat. Is that correct?
What's the age
Oh,
range
yes.
of Message to Adolf? The 3 Adolf book. What's the age range?
Oh. There's no sex and no violence. So, I mean, there's no visual violence. I mean, there are skirmishes. So I would guess older, middle grade, young YA, something like that.
Graphic novel, though, right?
Yes, graphic novel. And it was inspired because, getting back to Shanghai and the Jews who lived in Japan, the author, Tezuka Osamu, grew up in Kobe. And Kobe, as you may know, is the city to which the Jews who escaped from Eastern Europe took the Trans-Siberian Railway and ended up in Shanghai. They came to Japan first, and they stayed in Japan for about a month, and then they were transferred out of Japan from Kobe to Shanghai. And so he's
transferring. The Japanese government did the army, whoever did the transferring?
It was under the approval of the Japanese government, but I think it was private shipping companies or passenger lines. And Tezuka Osamu saw the Jews who were living in Kobe for that short period of time and must have been inspired.
Oh, very good.
And I just want to thank Lisa for putting that link into the chat.
And now Lisa has added a question to the chat. David, what's the name of the recent French book that you talked about?
It was about Superman. Let me think of that.
Let me check, because I wrote it down. David told me about it.
I told you a day or two ago. Superman and Me, or God is not Superman. I know, something like that. We will come up with it. But there's also, I don't know if you are aware of the publisher Restless Books. It's a book company that was started by the Amherst professor Ilan Stavins, who, as you may know, is a Jew from Mexico. And he has written on literature in Hebrew, in Yiddish, in Spanish, and in English. And one of his books projects is he's created his own publishing company. And they have a youth imprint called Yonder. And one of the books that they published this past year was called Daniel and Ismail, which was printed in English, Hebrew, and Arabic in 3 languages. And it's a picture book about 2 kids in Chile. The original book was written in Chile and about how there's a big population of Palestinians in Chile, and how the 2 kids learned to coexist, as it were, through soccer in Chile. Unfortunately, Restless Books has published mostly adult literature, not kids. There is only one other title that they have dealt with on a Jewish subject for their children's imprint.
Very good. Do you want to look up the name of this Superman book?
Yes, I'm doing that right now.
Okay, very good.
Good. I was trying to, but I think we'll be
You're raising
faster.
your hand. What else, Lisa?
While he does that, I wanted to ask about that green bean prize, because that's new to me. So what is the parameters? So you just have to be published somewhere else and you want to be translated into English, and then they will give you the prize and then translate your book, so that an Israeli book, a Hebrew book could get it, or a Danish book. Is that what you're saying?
I believe so. I haven't looked in detail about the criteria. I know part of the aim is for Green Bean to be able to come up with manuscripts that it can publish, and whether they have to be pre-published in all these other countries, or whether they can be just manuscripts written in those languages, I am not sure. Green Bean and also, the Jewish Week in the UK have
Jewish
website.
Week.
Yes, have descriptions of the criteria, and they will. I think their deadline is something like early September for the first round of this award.
And these are books for young children.
Yes.
This is the first year of this prize?
Yes.
Yeah, it hasn't been given yet, so it's brand new. And after they give the award and we see the short list and the books, we'll have, I think, a better idea of what it's all about.
Now,
But the
is that a little
prize
funny
is-
for a publisher to be giving the prize, because now they have to consider their books up against other books, other
Well,
people's
the
books?
prize
No,
is
the prize.
publication by Green Bean.
Oh, I see. So it's for manuscripts, or it's for
that's
the books in the original language, and they choose something to translate?
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's what
that's what
we're
it
not sure.
seems. I think
Yeah.
that's what it is, because Green Bean, I've been talking to that guy, Michael, and he's I think he can't find enough. That's his goal, is to publish books that are out there and good, that have been published, because that shows that they went through some sort of editing or whatever, and then he translates them. So the one that, in fact, if you clicked on the Israel link for translated books from Israel, on the picture on that is one of the books he translated, The Basket Full of Figs. So anyway,
Okay.
so that's the book. Superman Isn't Jewish. Okay, I'm gonna check that out.
All right. Any other questions?
I have one last question.
Go for it.
That has nothing to, it's not about translated books, really. It's, what are the two of you, what is your position or opinion about books like Ilan Stefan's, what he's done? I have an opinion about when you have a picture book that has Arabic and Hebrew and Spanish, or Arabic and Spanish, or English and Spanish on the same page. I find them that they're not as effective as they think they are doing, but maybe I'm wrong. What's your take on having two languages in a book, especially two languages with no connection to each other? In other words, like Chinese and, or some sort of Native American language I've seen. Seems to be a trend.
Why do you think it's not effective?
I think that I don't know. I don't find it as compelling. I can't explain it. I just, if you have, especially if it's in the letters, in the Latin letters, maybe, then I could try to figure out which words are the same. But if you've got a Chinese scripty thing and then you've got English, I just bleep over that. And I just don't know why it's good unless you're trying to just go for a family that can read both, which is so rare. So I don't know, maybe it's.
Well, I mean, I'm no expert, but I would think it's partly for families that are bilingual, so that everybody in the family has access to the story.
Right.
But I think it's also really nice just to raise awareness. So even if a kid only knows one language, it makes them realize, oh, other languages exist. And
Well,
here's what they look like.
That's the main thing you get out of it. I just wonder if it creates a book that kids like as much, if it's more busy on the page. So anyway.
That's of interest to me. I don't want to really toot my own horn, but my book that I talked about, Are You an Echo, is bilingual in part of it. For instance, I will show you here. There's poetry. This is the Japanese side. It's vertical in characters. The opposite side is English. And there were, part of the book is a narrative which is not bilingual. And the idea was that we would have multiple languages so that we would have an audience both in the United States and in Japan. And in fact, we were concerned that this kind of an esoteric subject would not be of much interest. So we thought that having an audience abroad, and you'd have all the English language learners wanting to read the poems in their original and compare it with our translations. So that was part of a marketing issue for the publisher. Whether it is less effective, I don't know. For American readers, is it a turnoff to see that? Or is it a taste of what language looks like in other countries? I would say Ilan Stefan's book with the three, I may have it here. Yeah, I have it. The three languages, it looks like this. I don't know if you can see that. This is much more busy. For instance, here's a page with English, Hebrew, and Arabic on the top.
I think they did a pretty good job. It's not as busy as you would expect.
Right. The text is, there's not so much text. Oh, here's a page with a lot of text.
Busier later, yeah.
Right. And I would say they positioned that book as a Kickstarter. And so they were seeking public support for the sort of, probably the political position of the book and its message, as much as they were seeking a committed audience. And so I think that's why they went for a trilingual trilingual book. Although ironically, they didn't have the original language, which is Spanish.
I think one of the nice things about bilingual books or trilingual books is that you can use them in many different ways. So I think depending on your purpose, they could be very effective. But I don't have any kind of research handy to speak from, really.
One of the things in Are You an Echo that we were seeking was that the text and the poetry would read completely naturally for English speakers. But the illustrations would bring in the cultural references to Japan. For instance, this is a picture of a street scene. And the text in Japanese has kind of a similar effect. So when you're doing a translation, you have to deal with the question of how much do you cater to the target audience in terms of language, in terms of illustrations. And our balance in this particular book was to put the cultural elements more into the illustrations and the presence of the Japanese text than it was in the English text. And that may be a calculus that the publishers may be considering.
I just want to put in a really quick plug here for David's book, because I just loved it, Are You an Echo? And there's nothing Jewish about it, okay? This is, so forget we're like in AJL land here.
Just a lovely book.
But just a really lovely book that I think fell through the cracks somewhat in terms of awards, because it wasn't this and it wasn't that. Right, David?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, so it's a wonderful book that you may not have heard about because of that. So yeah, do read it.
So it's 8 o'clock, and this has been a really interesting presentation and conversation. We're going to put the video and the slides. Well, the video will end up on our YouTube channel. The slides will end up somewhere on the website, but actually, if you want, I could share them with you now. If you're, should I do that? I can put the PDF as a document through Zoom.
Heidi, if we
Like me
click
to do
on
that?
the link that came out at the top of the chat, that's going to give us a list of the books you referenced in the talk, correct?
Right, Annette? That's the handout.
Thank you.
That
Nice
list is the
program,
books.
everybody. Really good.
Well, the handout has the books that we talked about, but the extra things in the chat you can save if you go down to the bottom of the chat, to the right, to the little ellipsis, the 3 dots,
Yes.
and then click on Save Chat.
Oh, and where does it save or we pick? I have
Probably to your downloads folder, most likely.
Yes,
To a
it'll
Zoom
pop up.
folder, but it will pop up.
okay, because the thing is
That's right, to a Zoom
the
folder.
chat save, but I don't know where.
When you close out, it will give you a little open folder, so you'll see it right away.
Very nice to know.
I would find it very helpful if you could share that document in the chat.
Okay, so I see that the PowerPoint file, it doesn't want to let me
Oh, okay.
upload it, but we'll make it available through AJL.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, well, thank you for coming, everybody. And Annette and David, thank you for an excellent presentation.
David, it was wonderful.
It was
Thank
really
you.
eye-opening. You opened.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Very
Thanks,
informative.
everybody, for coming.
Wonderful.
Yeah,
Thank you.
you all. Thank you for this opportunity to talk about the award.
Yes, indeed. Thank you.